Hey, Bob, how you doing?
I'm good, Connor. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Why don't I introduce us? I am Connor Eccles, the managing editor of NonZero. This is NonZero World, the weekend edition of the NonZero podcast, in which we talk about all of the big foreign policy news of the week. You're, of course, Robert Wright, the editor in chief of NonZero, the NonZero newsletter, the NonZero media empire. And we are here to talk today about a bunch of different things. We're going to talk about lots and lots of news in Israel. I think that we're going to be describing as sort of maybe it's past the nail in the coffin of the two-state solution. We're in the sort of leaning hard into an Israel one-state solution type thing, and then also about some complexity with the talks. But first, we have a little bit of housekeeping.
Yeah, so I'm sorry to say that this will be your last week hosting Non-Zero World because you are leaving Non-Zero, unless the reports I've heard to that effect are erroneous. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm probably not, right?
No, 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 that's correct. Yeah, so I am indeed leaving non-zero, which I am sad to be doing. I love the audience very much. It's been a really great joy, but I'm going to be going back to do some reporting back at Responsible Statecraft, which is attached to the Quincy Institute, and just felt like I wanted to get back into that day-to-day reporting business. But it has been a ton of fun doing this show, and it's been a ton of fun working with NonZero. So you know that I'm very excited to be the number one NonZero fan.
Huh. There's so much competition for that title, Connor. I don't know. My mother's my wife, so that's two people right there. Um, so yeah, very sorry to see you go. You've done great work for us. First of all, you've done a lot of behind the scenes work in a kind of managerial capacity, perhaps more of that kind of work than you would like. But you've also done a lot of great writing, a lot of great journalism. I particularly recommend your piece on Alex Karp, the arguably nefarious CEO of Palantir, which is in our archives. I think it's Anatomy of a Silicon Valley Hawk, maybe
Right.
um, the title. And I'm sure you're going to be doing a lot of great work at Statecraft, the Quincy Institute's publication. And I'm sure you'll have time to devote more of your time to journalism. So I encourage people to keep an eye on Responsible Statecraft, they should do anyway. It's a very distinctively valuable resource for foreign policy news and analysis. I would also encourage them to
Mhm.
keep an eye on the Non-Zero newsletter and podcast, because there will be some changes. We're gonna add some new dimensions, thanks in part to some new people who are gonna be joining, the team. For starters, there is Nikita Petrov, who is familiar to some people in our audience, no doubt. It's kind of a funny thing where people seem to leave the non-zero orbit and re-enter. In fact, you, Connor, had done a 1 year stint several years ago before you did this 1 year stint.
Right.
Nikita was with us some years ago, and he is going to rejoin the team, partly to fill maybe one of your shoes or part of one of your shoes, kind of a managerial capacity, but also he will be visible. Um, and in fact, he and I will be doing some podcasts, and the first of those is next week, where we will be talking at some length about some new things that are going to happen in Non-Zero and our openness to ideas for new things that might happen on Non-Zero. For now, I'd say two things about that. One is that there will be some new tech features in the coming months, I think, and that's partly due to another person who's to two people really. One is doing one of these reentry things, and the other one has never worked with us before, but is going to be doing some workforce each week. Between the two of them, I think they have the capacity to do almost anything technologically, especially with the able assistance of Clark McGillis, the design god, whose name often appears in the same sentence as Johnny Ives.
Right.
Um, and You'll find out more about those. some of them will be visible, I think. I mean, they'll all be visible in the sense of transparent. If we use AI to do new content or anything, we'll tell you about that. But in addition, I'm hoping to develop some kind of community facing things that enrich the non-zero experience. And that leads to the second thing I want to say quickly. Community. One thing we hope to do is, if there are people in the audience or non-zero subscribers or whatever who wish they felt like more a part of a community by virtue of their connection to non-zero, we want to find new ways to make that possible. And as you know, Connor, Danny Finster, who joined us a few months ago, is going to be very much involved in that.
Right.
He wrote this great piece, people may remember, about he had a good childhood friend who was also Jewish, and then uh, they diverged as time went by in terms of their views in the Middle East. That's in our archives too. But Danny's going to be very much involved in the community stuff. I should add that if you don't feel like you want to be a member of a community, that's fine too. I was personally somebody who sat in the back of a class. Uh, Audience is fine. So anyway, uh, next, for a week from today, Nikita and I will be doing a podcast. It'll be on the YouTube channel as well as on the podcast feed. We will talk at considerable length about things we're sure we're going to do and things we're open to doing, and how people can contribute to the conversation.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
uh,
I'll add too, just to kind of foot stomp that people should be really excited. I think the level of creativity that Nikita brings to projects that he works on is
mhm.
really outstanding. There's gonna be really fun stuff, both video, audio, visual, all that kind of stuff. He's a real whiz at that. So it's gonna be fun times for NonZero.
Yeah, Nikita's great. Uh, and he's from Russia, and so
Right.
we'll add to the number of different kinds of perspectives that we like to stay in touch with. Um, so I don't know. I mean, as kind of sad as I feel about your departure, I'm afraid we're about to head into sadder news. I mean, I'd like to talk about both Israel and Ukraine. No good news on either front. I don't know what you want to start with. This week's newsletter spends a little more time on Israel, but
Yeah.
what do you want to talk about?
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and start with Israel? I mean, there's sort of a million different threads to pull on this one. I guess maybe I can give a little bit of a recap of some of the news lines from this week, and then you can dive in on your commentary on them. But basically, we've seen what seems to be it seems as if they're approving a invasion of Gaza City constantly, but now it looks like they really are going to do that. Israel has called up 60,000 reservists and announced that 20,000 more reservists that are currently on active duty will have that active duty extended. And so we're going to see, in all likelihood, a large scale operation. And at the same time this week, and I believe that was just this morning or yesterday, the UN's official monitor for famine declared that in Gaza City itself, there is officially famine. This is a famously the IPC, I forget what that stands for, but it's a long name and the acronym's easier. The IPC very rarely issues these famine declarations, almost always does them after the fact. So this is sort of an extraordinary development. In terms of other major news, there was in the West Bank, well, pardon, while people have been focused on Gaza, there has been the declaration from, I believe, was it Smotrich or Ben Gvir that was doing this?
Well, Smotrich said most of the stuff I saw quoted.
Right.
Well, no, which thing are you talking about? The
Talking about the settlement expansion. So they're sort of
Yeah. Well,
officially
he was the one who celebrated it and said, "Yeah,
right.
this is the whole idea is to put the final nail in the coffin of the two-state solution." The reason we wanted to lead with Israel stuff this week is because there were really two fronts of bad news. I mean, in
Right.
in the sense that on the one hand, yes, Israel seems poised to invade Gaza City unless Bibi bails out under popular pressure. There was a very big anti-war demonstration in
Yeah.
Tel Aviv. Hundreds of thousands of people last Sunday. And Israel's not a big country. That's a high, that's a pretty high percentage of people to be marching. But unless he bails out, they're going to invade Gaza City. The other thing, it was reported this week that they've been talking to officials in South Sudan about relocating Gazans there. So it increasingly looks like the plan in Gaza is, I mean, there's already been ethnic cleansing in both the West Bank and Gaza in the sense of intimidating Palestinians into moving to places other than where they had lived, and killing people in the process, with the settlers doing most of the work in the West Bank. But it sounds like we may be talking about the wholesale ethnic cleansing of Gaza. So there's that, and then, as you said, there's this settlement called E1 that was approved, and that's long been considered. I mean, to say it's the final nail in the coffin of two-state solution makes a two-state solution sound more viable than it's been for many years. I mean, there was
Yeah.
almost no hope anyway, but uh, this really, what this does is completes a chain of settlements that effectively kind of divide the West Bank in half and render any hopes of a contiguous Palestinian state in the West Bank uh, pretty much hopeless, even assuming politics were conducive to a two-state solution, which they're nowhere near being anyway. So it sounds like by the time politics could be more conducive to a two-state solution, should that ever happen, it'll be out of the question. I don't. Yeah, it's not good.
Yeah. Yeah, and perhaps just as importantly, in terms of it bisecting the West Bank, the Z1 settlement also. So you've got like the Ma'ale Adumim settlement that's a little bit further out, and this connects all of those. It completes the sort of circle around Jerusalem. So it's as much about sort of eliminating the possibility of a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem as it is about bisecting the West Bank and adding more complexity there. And anyone who's been, I don't know how many of our listeners have been to the West Bank, but you know, this will just add, even before we get to the question of how this affects sort of political things and long-term solutions, this will just add yet more difficulties for the simple kind of getting from town to town in the West Bank. It's sort of extraordinary when you go there.
Yeah.
A drive that takes 45 minutes on Israeli only roads, on those might take 2-3 hours, right, for a Palestinian if they're lucky, and that's staying within the West Bank the entire time. That's only going to add to those complications. So it's just a situation where we're seeing, even as, and I think a lot of this, from the perspective of the Israeli government, seems to be sort of thumbing the nose at the international community as much as they can. And I don't mean that necessarily, it's a pejorative phrase, obviously, but I think it's genuinely that they think that the international community has gone crazy and that they know that this will make them mad, that like France and all the countries that recognize the Palestinian state are going to be angry about this. And so they're sort of leaning into the skid in many ways. It's a situation where it's become less and less clear how any state except for the US could really influence Israel whatsoever.
Yeah, if you've ever been in the West Bank, I mean, I was last there like 15 years ago, and it was already, as you said, there's all these highways snaking around it the Palestinians aren't allowed to drive on. So,
Right.
if the cousin lives 3 miles away, but there was a highway was recently built, they may have to drive, 50 miles to see their cousin. So it was just getting harder and harder. I remember when I was there on this kind of tour, we were in a small bus. I don't know, maybe 10 of us were on this thing. And one of the women, who is now a very well known columnist, much better than she was then, and she's Jewish. And at the moment when we realized, that moment when the guy from Breaking the Silence, this group of former IDF soldiers who have turned against the occupation, who was guiding us, explained the highways and how, it's already become kind of Swiss cheese. She said, if I was Palestinian, I'd strap a suicide vest on. She wasn't serious, of course, but it was a very it's a very dramatic. There's a lot of things you can see there that will really get your attention. And I mean, yeah, as for the international reaction, I think a lot of people in Israel believe, look, we are going to be widely hated regardless, certainly by our immediate neighbors. You got to do what you got to do. And in any event, I mean, it's not like the European nations are really bringing out any big guns. I mean, Britain says, well, we may now recognize a Palestinian state. Well, if there's no place a state could possibly be, that doesn't really matter. Um, so I don't know. I don't, and Trump, of course, has, I think we'll get around to Ukraine, which is becoming evident is another big Trump failure. But God knows he hasn't fought the good fight here, and you know, he just shows uh no signs of wanting to. So
Yeah, that's sort of the strange thing. I actually don't know what to make of that exactly. I mean, I guess, it's a popular thing to say, and it's something that we've said, obviously on the show plenty of times, that Trump clearly lacks the sort of patience that you need in these things that will end up being difficult, extended talks. There will be, things that happen that will knock you back a few steps. You're going to have to really work with it. And obviously, any situation as complicated as the war in Gaza in terms of the like desires of what Hamas and what Israel want is going to be difficult to do these negotiations. But it is shocking the extent to which Trump has just sort of completely decided that this is not worth thinking about. I mean, there's ways in which he's obviously, I don't know if ideologically aligned or just temperamentally aligned with what Israel is doing. He seems broadly okay with the current war aims. He doesn't seem to be in a terrible rush for a ceasefire in general. But I don't know. It struck me as genuinely odd the kind of total disinterest in trying to bring this war to an end. That it's so at odds with how he talked during the campaign. It's so at odds with where a lot of the energy is on the right too. I mean, we're seeing people like obviously Marjorie Taylor Greene is no centrist. she's but she's out there talking a lot, and she's an important part of sort of MAGA world, and she's out there talking a lot about how this is genocide, how this is a situation that must end, and that
yeah,
is riling up the base, and it's a base that is eager to be riled up about this because frankly they're pissed.
yeah. I mean, she's getting edgy. I don't know. Did you see the clips from the Megyn Kelly show when she was talking about either Israel, the Israel lobby controlling pretty much everyone in Congress? Um, That used
No,
to be
she's really
language
going
that
in.
would get you into big trouble. But, the bounds are changing. There is more discontent, within MAGA generally with Trump's foreign policy, along multiple dimensions, certainly in the case of Israel. I think the problem with Israel and Ukraine are kind of different. I mean, so far as Trump goes. In Ukraine, I think he would very, very, very much like to have a deal and end this. Uh I think in the case of Israel, he doesn't seem to really care. Now,
Yeah,
one thing that there is in common between the two situations is that I think in both cases he needs to use leverage more forcefully, and he's for some reason reluctant to. He's reluctant to use leverage with Russia. I mean, he'd have to do a lot of other things right that he's not capable of doing right. I mean, I think with Ukraine, the competence issue looms large, and we'll
yeah,
get into that. I mean, it's just a comedy of errors. He's a total buffoon. Um, but in the case of Israel, of course, the leverage is extremely clear cut. We provide the weapons. If any president ever had the courage to actually cut them off, you would get their attention. No president does. Uh, they tend to be afraid of the domestic political repercussions. And sometimes, I mean, people said Biden had some kind of heartfelt thing about Israel. I wouldn't say Obama did, but sometimes that's a factor. In any event, that's the thing the two have in common is Trump is afraid to use the leverage with the party that I think needs to have more leverage used against it. I mean, clearly in Israel's the one that could end the war. If you want the war ended,
right.
you got to put pressure on Israel. we'll get to Ukraine. I personally think, and here I think I may differ from some of your soon-to-be colleagues at Quincy. Um, I think he needs to apply more forceful leverage on Russia, even in the form of incrementally threatened and delivered shipments of arms to Ukraine. But we can get to that. Is there anything else you want to say about Israel? I mean, there's so much,
Oh yeah, what is? I
but it's
mean,
so depressing.
I don't know. I'm thinking of other things. So one other thing we mentioned in the newsletter, and this is more of a sign of the times than maybe I guess a crucial thing here, but there were these awful comments from a former Israeli general. He was the head of Israeli military intelligence. It's Aharon something. I forget his last name, but you can see this in The Guardian, Haaretz, and elsewhere. There was a major Israeli channel aired comments from him in which he said that it was necessary to kill 50 Palestinians, including children, for every Israeli that died on October 7th. Of course, we far exceeded that at this point, way more than 50 at this point. But that even in the low end estimate that you get from the Gaza Ministry of Health. But what was most interesting about that is that I guess the challenge is that Israeli society and the sort of Israeli political spectrum has moved so far in the direction of, there's nothing that we can do about the Palestinians except sort of continue pushing and pushing and pushing towards, this is part of why this is possible at this point. Why we're talking about ethnic cleansing at the scale that we're talking about is that the whole political spectrum, like this guy, our own former general guy, had been viewed as a centrist critic of the Netanyahu government. And this is what you get from the centrist critics of the Netanyahu government. So it kind of points to how there's this way in DC that people will talk about the idea of like, oh, this is Bibi's war. This is Netanyahu. And it's like, no, things have gotten more difficult. This is not to say anything beyond the fact that like this is genuinely the position of the broader Israeli public at this point, and you have to wrestle with that fact if you want to bring an end to this.
Yeah, I mean, we should say a lot of the public, once this war ended,
Sure.
in part to get all the hostages returned, uh, but at the same time, there's a pretty high, I don't even know if I want to say tolerance for the level of Palestinian suffering in both the West Bank and especially in Gaza. I mean, especially in terms of the magnitude of suffering. Because I think a lot of people in Israel kind of manage to not be aware of it. The mainstream media doesn't show them images. They can find the images if they want, but the images they see in mainstream media of Gaza are like buildings that have been leveled, but not like babies that have died.
Right.
And this is the way people are everywhere. And societies are everywhere. They have whole filters that shield themselves from the uglier consequences of what they're doing. So I think that's true. But I certainly agree. I am really sick of hearing like, well, it's Netanyahu, or people just insisting on phrasing things Israel does as the Netanyahu government doing them. That's not the way we talk about I mean, you do sometimes, but it's routine to say China did this, Russia did this. And
Right.
when Netanyahu does something, it's Israel that did it because he's the leader of Israel. And I feel the same way about Trump. We can't hide behind the fact that he's an idiot and a nut. I mean, he's the president. We elected him. He won the election. He is the American government, and he is America.
Right.
The way these things work. So yeah, like I mean, one thing in the newsletter, I mean, it's rare, I think, in mainstream media to find a reference to Smotrich or Ben Gvir without the word extremist in the same sentence, right? That's
Right.
the way they're identified. They're the extremists. I try to avoid that word because they're not all that. I'm sorry, they're in the cabinet and they're not really alone. I mean, you hear other cabinet members. I mean, them and the prime minister talk in these quote extremist ways, and some other cabinet members do too sometimes. And as you just said, this guy is considered a centrist. Um, is saying abhorrent things. And so, look, again, this is the way nations can get when they're
Right.
at war. or when they feel deeply threatened. And Israel has more reason to feel threatened than most nations. But my own view is that one reason they have so much reason is because they keep uh, taking the approach to that situation that they take, which is to just slash and burn. It's just, and lately it's been especially vivid. I mean, they just consider any, Syria, Lebanon, Iran fair game. If they feel like attacking, they will. And what they're doing in Gaza is, in my view, completely counterproductive from the point of view of Israel's longtime security.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it is
Yeah,
heartening
maybe.
that you're hearing more outrage about it in the United States, I guess.
I agree. Yeah, one other thing I'll say, and then let's move to Ukraine, is just to kind of expand on this theme a little bit, is I guess what's interesting about talking about like the Netanyahu government versus Israel, or about talking about the Trump administration versus the US, is that it is what you do about your country, right? Like it points to a way in which we feel an essential, in which many Americans feel an essential kinship with Israel, where it's like there's an idea of Israel, there's an idea of America, right? That we're subscribed to, that many Americans are subscribed to, and so you will tend to talk about whatever happens to be in power as this aberration. But we, like you said, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about the Macron administration in France as something that is essentially un-French. But we feel less kinship with them, less closeness from at least this political sense than we do with Israel. And I think that's part of what makes all of this so painful for many of the people in like Washington today, and what makes it almost like it. It's almost as if America is doing this, not just because we're basically doing this, but because we've been so closely linked for so long.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, but
Uh,
what
you
about
know,
Ukraine?
one other thing about Israel, I thought it was kind of fascinating on Twitter this week. Andrew Ross Sorkin, the New York Times business writer, I guess son of Aaron Sorkin. Uh, I gather he's pretty ardently pro-Israel. There were a number of clips circulating where people on the left were denouncing him and ridiculing him. But there was something in one of those clips. I watched the whole thing and I saw something in the middle of it that I thought was interesting. He was on, I think, Morning Joe with Jonathan Greenblatt, who's head of the Anti-Defamation
Mm,
League, which is, of course, ardently pro-Israel and kind of polices the speech code. Like they used to be like actually highly respected as the arbiters of what anti-Semitism is. I mean, Jimmy Carter, after using the word apartheid, literally like consulted them, how do I redeem myself? And they said, well, you should go talk to Ron Campius at JTA. Who's been on our podcast. Ron told me the story and do the interview, do the mea culpa, and like we'll forgive you. And I hope I've got the story right. I think that's what Ron told me. Anyway, it's
yeah, I
public.
think so.
Um, so Jonathan Greenblatt was on, and Andrew Sorkin said something I've kind of been saying, and I wish more people would say, which is that Bibi Netanyahu is making Jews around the world less secure. You
Yeah,
know, you're not supposed to say that anything Israel does could increase the amount of anti-Semitism in the world. In fact, that's one of the things that the ADL has been in charge of enforcing. You're not allowed to, you're an anti-Semite if you argue that anywhere in the world somebody could look at something Israel does and go off the deep end. Even if you hasten to add, it's not legitimate that they went off the deep end, or if their hatred was amped up, some level of pre-existing hatred or whatever. None of that is fair or good. But if you understand the way human psychology works, it should not surprise you that can happen, especially given how hard people like Netanyahu work to conflate Israel with the Jewish people around the world, which a
right.
number of Jews I know resent. Um, anyway, I would like that meme to get off the ground, that Bibi is a threat, and I believe he is, to Jews around the world. And to hear Andrew Sorkin, you know, no flaming lefty, I gather. Don't think you'll hear him chanting from the river to the sea, at least not the way not the way the protesters mean it. Um, and That was fascinating to me, and I think
Yeah,
that's another sign that maybe the conversation is shifting.
yeah, that is very interesting. That is very interesting. Yeah, he's certainly not. He had, kind of closing the loop on that. He actually often has had Alex Karp, who we mentioned at the top of the show, on his show to talk about various things from just the actual stuff that one would talk about, which is tech and whatever Palantir is up to, onto things like Israel, and certainly the tone of it has not been pro-Palestine.
Sorkin has had him on.
Yeah, yeah, they've talked a number of times publicly. I think, well, and things I think maybe hosted at Aspen or things like that, and then also doesn't Sorkin have a CNBC show or something like that? Anyway,
I think he does. Yeah, Karp is truly a scary guy. But
he is a
try
very
to
scary
find
guy.
the clip where he's going. We want them to fear us. We want them to fear us.
Yeah,
It's a very arresting
the hair really
image.
adds to it. It's important that you focus on that.
Yeah, the
He's
visuals
got
are
some of the
essential.
more unusual hair you'll ever see.
Yeah.
Anyway, why don't we shift to Ukraine? So, I mean, there's been a ton of news on this front. I kind of don't know where to start, but I don't know. Are you feeling thrilled? Do we have a peace deal? Has everything gone swimmingly?
I would not say so. I mean, well, actually, let's compare notes. So I gather that among the things that happened as, hope, the hope that Trump managed to create the illusion of coming out of his summit with Putin, and he may have suffered from the illusion himself. I don't know. I think he may well have, but I gather one of the reasons it fell apart was that he was saying Putin has agreed to is it Article 5 in the NATO Charter?
Yeah.
Article 5 like guarantees, which meant apparently, and he was talking about the US being whatever, that Western Europe could basically sign a mutual defense pact with Ukraine or something very much like it. And then I gather it became apparent, and I had heard this before about Putin's. Putin had floated this once before, I think, and I gather his position was that, yeah, in fact, we love that idea so much, we want to be part of it. And that would mean we have veto power about actually activating the mutual defense part, which, is kind of crazy. I mean, if Russia is saying, sure, this sounds great, and then if we decide to invade, we'll be able to veto the whole thing and it won't matter. Um, is that your sense that that's I'm only
Yeah.
98% sure that that's one of the many things that fell apart. The other is, no, it turned out Putin doesn't want to meet with Zelensky. It was a lot of things, but I think that's one of them.
Yeah. The security guarantee thing is very interesting because I don't know. One interesting approach that I saw floated by Sergei Radchenko. I forget where he is, but he's a pretty prominent uh, expert on. I think he focuses mainly on Russia, but he writes a lot about the Ukraine war. Interesting guy, and he was talking about the way to square the circle here might be because that Article 5 suggestion was in that original Istanbul proposal from like early 2022 from
Hmm.
the drafts that we've seen. There was some version of that. It was going to involve Russia as a guarantor. And the argument that Rodchenko makes is that what you should do is make clear, even if it's not in the text of the deal itself, but perhaps in an open letter to Ukraine or in some other type of forum, that you will consider an invasion by Russia to violate that and to remove its ability to impose a veto, right? Because at the end of the day,
Hmm.
we're just talking about states agreeing to mechanisms that allow them to sort of justify a response. I mean, the hard thing here is that the sort of elephant in the room that has not necessarily been addressed with security guarantees, and I don't know if it is addressable, is that I'm just not actually convinced that either the US or Europe is actually willing to come to Ukraine's literal aid with boots on the ground in case of Russian invasion. We've obviously seen that we haven't, right? Demonstrably, we have not been willing to do that
Hmm.
for the past 3 years. We could have done that at any point. In my opinion, it would have been a bad idea, but it does strain credulity a little bit for us to claim that, okay, these security guarantees are actually going to be ironclad if we're simply not willing to go to war with Russia now when Russia is, again, in a bad military position, too. It's not even like Russia's not going to get weaker before the next war, if there were to be one. So the security guarantee has always felt like a bit of a muddle. I almost don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, and this gets to one thing I would say I think distinguishes my view from some of the, like, otherwise very valuable perspectives we get from Quincy. So, like Anatole Levin, who's been on the podcast before, and George, does he pronounce it Beeb or BB? Beeb?
BB.
BB. He hasn't changed it in light of recent Middle Eastern history.
No.
Still BB. Um, the you know, it, it is so valuable that they insist on giving us Russia's perspective because otherwise it's very hard to find. And a good example is the whole troops on the ground issue. It's like apparently Russia has been pretty clear for some time that they cannot live with a deal that involves the troops of NATO members in Ukraine on the ground as some kind of guarantor of Ukraine's security. I gather, and the place you'll find that fact is like responsible statecraft, things that Bibi and Anatole Wright. And if you look at the mainstream media, like after this summit, it was like, oh, so let's see. Will there be American troops on the ground in Ukraine as guarantors, or just Western European troops? And like that was the scope of the coverage. And so many articles in important elite publications didn't even raise the question of whether Russia hadn't said no way. Now, I'm not saying you should respect the red lines in negotiations. I'm not saying you can't still say, no, our position right now is that we are going to have the troops on the ground. Fine. But if the American people are going to be well informed about the whole situation, somebody's got to tell them you're going to have a hard time getting this past Russia, whose view
Mm.
matters. But I will say, on the other hand, that when I read stuff by Anatole and Bibi, I sometimes wish I would see more about the Ukrainian perspective. And I totally get where they're coming from because, I mean, I've been accused of during the war when I was writing more, especially in the early part about this, of only looking at things from Russia's point of view. And one reason was the media was doing a wonderful job of conveying the way things look from Ukraine's point of view. We don't need more of that. But I still sometimes when I read their stuff, the sentence I want to see is, yeah, the question I want raised is, can Ukrainians really feel secure if there aren't boots on the ground in Ukraine? That to me is not that easy to imagine. As you
Yeah.
said, security guarantees on paper, what the hell do those really mean? Right? I
Yeah.
mean, if you're in Ukraine and you've endured this war, they don't mean much. And so now there are, it's conceivable that there could be boots on the ground that aren't from NATO members. But if our media and our elite, even foreign policy press, doesn't lay out what kinds of red lines have been laid down and what kinds of issues seem like they're going to be a tough sell on both sides, we won't even get to that conversation.
Yeah.
My favorite kind of fanciful solution. I mean, it's kind of a joke, but Russia says no NATO troops in Ukraine, and I gather they've also said they would like to see the NATO lines rolled back to like the 90s. So NATO expansion undone. So how about this? We do that, and then Poland can put troops in Ukraine because it won't be in NATO. I'm guessing
Yeah. Yeah.
Russia
There you go.
wouldn't. Yeah. See, this is
Yeah,
how
that's an idea.
creative you get when you,
What we need is we need NATO 2. We need NATO 2 that's just Eastern Europe, and then NATO 1 Western Europe, and then
right.
maybe that'll kind of solve all these different problems. We just we split it into pieces. Well, because then Russia can't argue that there are nuclear weapons on its doorstep or anything, because it would be a presumably non-nuclear Poland, Ukraine, Latvia, Estonia, etc. No, I mean it's a difficult. All of these things have definitely highlighted the extent to which the talks are extremely difficult, right? There is just no feasible way for them to come together without significant concessions from both sides. I mean, the underlying logic for pursuing negotiations, I think, is still totally sound, which is that we are on Ukraine's side. We should be on Ukraine's side, and Ukraine is losing the war on the ground. It will get worse the longer we wait. We need to get negotiations going now so that we don't get screwed over even more in the future, and so that
Hmm.
Ukraine can start the process of rebuilding that will be extremely difficult if we don't reach some sort of political settlement. And the other part that I think is very sound is that I think it is the right decision to talk about these broader strategic issues, right? Russia does not accept the idea that Ukraine is just about Ukraine. That's the position that the West has preferred, and it's simply not going to work as well in negotiations. And it does help to give more. We've talked about this in the show in the past, but if we're able to talk about not actually rolling back NATO, but perhaps moving some forward station NATO troops from Poland back to Germany or something, an incremental thing. And if that can be done in exchange for a concession related to Ukraine, that's not a bad thing, right? That gives more opportunities for us to apply leverage and for us to take advantage of different negotiating tactics so that we can get the best possible deal for Ukraine. Of course, that's not what we're seeing in particular from the Trump administration. We're seeing, he went into the meeting in Anchorage saying, okay, I'm going to get out of this with a ceasefire, and otherwise this is a disaster or whatever. It's failed. Totally abandoned the idea of a ceasefire, moved on to the idea of land swaps. And it was interesting. I heard a Russian analyst. If people want to check out an interesting podcast to check out to get the Russian position pretty consistently, or various positions, is Peter Slezkine over at the Stimson Center has a thing called the Trialogue. And he had a prominent guy, I forget his name, but a prominent Russian analyst on. And he was talking about how Russia views it as a concession that they only want, and from their view, right, only the entirety of the Donbass, right? And that they're no longer demanding the entirety of Zaporizhia and the entirety of some of these other oblasts in the southeast of Ukraine. And so they view that as like, oh, okay, we've sort of moderated our position. So that was
Hmm.
interesting. But anyway, so you got the land swaps, and then now we're talking about security guarantees, and it just seems as if things have started to fall apart.
Oh yeah, and on the land issue, it's common uh, for people, especially in America, to say, "Wait, Russia wants Ukraine to just like vacate the rest of the Donbass, just give them the land." Um, that's crazy. You just don't do that. And like as a practical matter, whether you do it depends on how much power you have. The
Mm,
day may come in a couple of months where Ukraine would gladly do that because the Russians are running roughshod through the Donbass and threaten to go well beyond it. I don't know. I mean, I wish we weren't living in a world where it's all about power, but it pretty much is, and that's why, of course, years ago, some of at the end of 2022, some of us said now's the time to strike a deal. Mark Milley, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, you'd think his voice should carry some weight, said it. I think kind of most clearly and loudly.
right.
But it is if we don't have a way of strengthening Ukraine and their ability to push back against Russia militarily, we have to acknowledge what kind of bargaining position we're in. Um, Now, I wish we would do. I wish Trump, in particular, again, would do some things to put a little more of the fear of God in Russia. And one thing about my view is I really hate the idea of somebody who just invaded another country, violating international law, uh, getting rewarded for it. So I just want Russia to get the worst deal possible, kind of the
Right.
worst deal that is stable, that doesn't lead to another war. Um, but Trump, God knows if there's anybody who doesn't care about international law, it's Trump. But also, he's just completely incompetent. And so is the administration. As you said, this is a very complicated situation. It would be hard, for the Kissingers of the world to pull off. Um, Trump, and he has hollowed out his own foreign policy apparatus.
Mm,
And so you don't have as much expertise or competence as you would like to have, nowhere near. And then he himself, I'm sorry, is a total idiot. I will never understand the amount of hope for his foreign policy that we saw among like some conservative restrainers going into this administration. It's just
Well, I
a
mean,
repeat of last time.
it is to a significant extent a repeat of last time. Maybe this is a good time for us to transition into overtime. I do want to ask you more about what exactly what pressure the Trump administration could bring to bear on Russia, because it does seem as if we've sort of exhausted a lot of the options there. So I'm curious to dig into that. I also want to talk about another way in which Trump has sort of leaned into being the war president rather than the sort of peace president that he pitched himself as, which is his deployment of troops and ships to the Caribbean, in the area around Mexico, around Venezuela, in order to potentially carry out in the future strikes against the cartels and Venezuelan gangs that he has deemed to be foreign terrorist organizations. Are there other things that we should preview?
Uh, there's, in the newsletter, in this week's Earthling, the NonZero newsletter, there's stuff about AI. There's other stuff that's escaping my memory, but I will a number of items about Israel, uh, some about Ukraine. There was one other. Oh yeah, the yeah. Apparently, we are in danger of being invaded by foreign species of ants, which actually can be a problem.
Right.
And apparently, that's because of cuts Trump has made in the USDA department that monitors ant smuggling, which apparently is a thing. People smuggle ants. Who knew?
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of stuff in the newsletter. But happy to head into overtime. I will say that the question it seems like you're gonna bring up, I think uh will illuminate a kind of connection between Ukraine and Israel, in my mind at least, in terms of things that Trump could do that would make both situations better in one fell swoop.
Okay. Well, thank you to everyone who's listened to the public portion. Hopefully, many of you will be joining us in overtime, and you can, of course, do so if you are not already a NonZero member by heading over to nonzero.org and getting yourself set up with a subscription and a private feed for the podcast. But anyway, I think it's time to make the jump. So, this was a free preview of NonZero World. To unlock the rest of this conversation and other exclusive content, become an NZN member today at nonzero.org.